Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Ask the Doctor. Today we are going to be learning how to master metabolism, the key to fat loss. And the man of the hour who will be teaching us, he also teaches, trains, and lectures doctors all over the world, has done over 10,000 hours in that kind of training. He's been in clinical practice now for 31 years and counting, family man and mentor, the incredible Dr. Bob Rakowski.
Well, Carol, thank you always. I certainly appreciate you. And, you do such a phenomenal job with the intro and monitoring the chat. By the way, if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat. I like to tell people 31 years now in clinical practice, and I've seen all ends of the spectrum. I've seen world champions from every major professional sport. I've seen people sent home to die. And I really enjoy teaching doctors and patients, right? All the good things about health, because there's a lot of information that isn't so good out there. I taught an obesity seminar in about 2005, an international obesity seminar. And you know what they said in 2005? The medical literature said this: we haven't figured out obesity. Now, I've got to tell you, I listened to a comedian one time and he said, I wonder what could be the problem. Well, how about not eating right? How about not moving? How about not managing your stress? All those things, certainly we have to pay attention to that. But sadly, medicine really doesn't pay attention to that. And the picture on the right is actually their solution. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. But notice what this says. It says enormous progress has been made in the last half century in the management of diseases closely integrated with excess body weight. So that would be like high blood pressure. Okay, they got drugs for that. Diabetes, they got drugs for that. Cholesterol, they got drugs for that. By the way, none of them address cause and effect. But notice what it says. However, the treatment of obesity itself has proven largely resistant to therapy with medications. And by the way, weight loss surgery is probably even worse than that. So, they used to have this thing called a fat blocker. It went by the trade name Orlistat. And the reality is the majority of people that took this is what the side effect was: mild fecal incontinence. So when I was teaching my obesity seminar to doctors, I said, all right, someone please tell me, what is mild fecal incontinence? And a smart guy in the front row said, that's when it happens to someone else, and he got a good chuckle out of that. And I'll tell you what, if it happens to you, I promise you, it is certainly not mild. But when you start looking at these bariatric surgeries, which they're doing so much, these individuals suffer severe malnutrition. And in fact, it can even be deadly because they just basically butcher the digestive system and its medically induced malabsorption. And understand, even with ideal absorption, many people are malnourished. And here are the stats. The more common extreme gastric bypass is called the Roux-en-Y procedure. 87% of these people, by medical management or medical assessment, have profound malnutrition. And here's what I'll tell you, probably 100% of them had malnutrition even before the surgery. So by the time you're medically malnourished, you are in real big trouble. So when we start talking about eating less and exercising more, is it true that there's more to the game than this? And certainly there is. So first and foremost, if we start talking about food environment, the environment that our food is grown in, there's a lot of things that we know. And so when people would eat nutritious food, whole food, unprocessed food, obesity was nowhere near the challenge. So we know that basically the number one cause of death on planet Earth is malnutrition. We know that we've depleted the soil around the planet. If you've seen asked a doctor before, the top fertilizer in the world is called NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. It takes 30 elements to create healthy plants, animals, and humans. And by depleting the soil, they grow depleted plants, which these depleted plants eaten by the animals create depleted animals. And when humans eat depleted plants and depleted animals, they're also depleted. And guess what? If you don't get what you need, you're always hungry. So there's a big factor in satiety. Then when we start looking at the emotional state, what we know, and I'll show a reference on it, as we go through here, but most people are in a state of chronic distress. And when you elevate your stress hormones, your digestive process becomes inefficient. but your body also then raises blood sugar to fight or flee and actually opposes the action of insulin. And we'll find out later that insulin is the master fat storage hormone in the body. So when you're eating in a stress state, you are going to be in a more fat storing, lean tissue breaking down state. Nutrient balance, I somewhat addressed. If you don't have the nutrients you need, you're constantly hungry. We'll talk about hormones later, including thyroid hormone, sex steroids. I'll mention a little bit about growth hormone, the body's most powerful fat-burning hormone, the stress hormones, and insulin. And all of these things are going to have an impact on blood sugar. And the body has a defense against blood sugar. The body does not want elevated blood sugar. So blood sugar is rapidly converted into fat and stored in fat tissue. And Guyton's textbook of medical physiology would say whenever there's an excess of sugar, it's rapidly converted to triglycerides and stored in adipose tissue. So when we start looking at exercise, certainly that's an important part, but what type of exercise are you going to get? So if you're doing aerobic exercise, you're going to burn, the energy while you're exercising, but you're not setting your body up to be an energy burning machine. What we know now is that more than 90% of the calories we burn are burned by muscle, even when we sleep. And it's pretty well known that if you're a purely aerobic athlete, you probably don't have much muscle mass. And that's a predictor of longevity and other factors related to obesity, et cetera, like that. And that's why they mention percent lean body mass, because the more lean you have, the better you are at burning fat. And by the way, the more fat you have, the less effective you are. So what's interesting about fat recycles stress hormones. Fat tends to store toxins. Fat is pro-inflammatory. Inflammation then raises stress hormones, and stress hormones oppose the action of insulin. And oddly enough, most things in physiology are a way where the body tries to protect itself, but fat is what we call a feed-forward phenomena. The fatter you become, the more easy it is to gain fat, the harder it is to lose the fat. And then we'll talk about the gut bacteria. We have more bugs in our gut than we have cells in our body. The difference between good bugs and bad is what they eat and what they poop. Good bugs eat poop and poop nutrients. Bad bugs eat nutrients, poop toxins. And there's now even something called the obese microbiome. When people have the wrong balance of bugs in their gut, they actually get more calories from their food, and that can be problematic. So I was asked earlier today, how big is the problem? It's global, and they now have the term globesity because literally the entire world is getting fat. And why is that? Predominantly stress, toxins, malnutrition, and lack of physical activity. So here we have a picture of a lean fat-burning body and then a fat-storing body. And the fat-storing body has too much insulin, an imbalance in gut bugs, high levels of adrenal distress, an imbalance in thyroid, suboptimal thyroid function, and even challenges with the liver clearing toxins. So very, very simply, you cannot store fat without insulin. High levels of insulin are going to spike blood sugar and then store body fat. And quite simply, the standard American diet, the SAD diet, or the modern American diet, the MAD diet, very, very processed, lots of white flour, light white sugar, even if they disguise it with pretty colors. And it's really a step into the grave. I'm a big fan of, you might call it paleo and keto, but here's a simple rule. If God made it, it's okay. If man made it, stay away. You see a little bit of white in here, but as a general rule, I like the memory aid. If it's white, keep it out of sight. You don't want to eat that because that generally will spike your blood sugar. When you start looking at the causes of hypothyroid, this is the master regulator of metabolism. It regulates the energy efficiency and energy rate of 99% of the tissues of the body. It's a very common organ for autoimmunity. And we've done Ask the Doctors on autoimmunity, but most people's understanding of autoimmunity is very off base. They think, okay, my immune system hates my thyroid and it wants to kill it. And I always ask them, well, why would it want to kill your thyroid? Don't you need that? They go, well, I thought I did. Well, you do. And your immune system wouldn't kill your thyroid. And in fact, something goes wrong with the thyroid. And the medical literature is clear on that. Cell injury precedes autoimmune disease. Leaky gut leads to more inflammation in the body. And certainly bad bugs in the gut can lead to increased calorie elevation. Adrenal challenges or stress challenges are definitely a big negative for the thyroid. Even low stomach acid can be associated with thyroid. And think about all these people that are taking acid blockers, which, by the way, is related, believe it or not, to a low stomach acid circumstance. And then this reference here calls out sluggish liver and estrogen dominance. And, often I'll talk about my favorite superfood on planet Earth, which happens to be Ganoderma, also known as reishi. And this is proven to help each of these circumstances of low thyroid. So when I would teach technical seminars to doctors, I'd show this very, very integrated chart with over 18 different mechanisms by which stress breaks down lean tissue and increases fat. For the purpose of this talk today, here's a fact. Chronic stress will make you fat. It increases sugar cravings. It increases hunger. It decreases satiety. It decreases your sleep efficiency. I tell people if you're not running on rest and recovery, you're running on stress hormones, and those continue to break down your body. And ultimately, if you don't get out of that stress circumstance, you're going to suppress your immune system, cause problems with your gut, your digestion, your joy, and certainly your thyroid and your body composition. So I've also taught about a stress reset. We use melatonin, theanine, Ganoderma spores every waking hour for 7 to 10 days. And this is pretty magic. And I put the PubMed references there, but this has been my top single most potent clinical intervention in about the last 15 years. I used to teach the symptoms of chronic poisoning as published in the journal Clinical Chemistry: fatigue, sleep disturbance, intestinal distress, allergy symptoms, headaches, confusion, and anxiety. All those things exist, but further expansion from that, which was a 1990 study, we also know that stubborn weight, especially fat gain around the middle, is associated with toxicity. So we start looking at this toxic world, over 80,000 registered toxic chemicals in the environment. And there's something called the Human Toxin Inventory. They basically took fat samples from cadavers and surgical patients. Why fat samples? Because most environmental toxins are fat soluble, and they store in the body fat. In fact, that is one of the mechanisms by which the body protects itself against these level of toxins. But they've determined that every man, woman, and child has over 700 toxins in their system. This was a really powerful article from Joe Pizzorno, who was, I don't know if he still is, the president of a naturopathic university called Bastyr University. Great author, great researcher. But ultimately, what we see is as these chemical toxins have been released in the environment, diabetes exactly parallels the amount of toxins that were released. And by the way, so does obesity. So this article here, Chemical Toxins, a Hypothesis to Explain the Global Obesity Epidemic. And what we know now is over the course of the last 20 years, it's been proven absolutely beyond a shadow of a doubt that poisoning the environment, poisoning our body, poisons our metabolism and leads to obesity. And the combination of obesity and diabetes, they are calling diabesity. So one of my rules in clinical practice, probably my second most potent clinical intervention, is when in doubt, detox. So the reason I show this graph of blood flow at rest, and that's what we're showing here, the liver actually gets the most blood flow at rest because it's bigger than the brain. The kidneys are number 2, and the brain is actually number 3, but it's smaller by unit volume. So your body's top priority at rest is detoxifying. So, I'll often ask my students as well as my patients, if the body's highest priority is to clean itself at rest, to detoxify, what should be our highest priority in practice? And certainly detox ought to be right up there. And, some people think, well, I'll just do a water fast or I'll watch what I eat. Okay, good ideas, but certainly not enough given the toxic burden on the world. So I tell people that detox is nutrient dependent, energy dependent, protein dependent. Why protein? Because in phase 1, these cytochrome P450 enzymes, these are proteins, and on a low protein diet like a water fast, the activity of these enzymes are reduced at least 50% in the first 24 hours, and it increases after there. So imagine that someone's stuck in the mud and you come by and you try to give them a little push and they hit the gas. Well, what happens is they spin their tires and the problems becomes worse. So, one of my pearls is bodies respond to frequency, duration, intensity, quality, and timing of stimuli. And I'm a big fan of an intense detox twice a year, anywhere from 7 to 10 days. Why not go January 1 and maybe the first day of June or July, because people tend to like to be leaner over the summer. And we basically do all organic vegetables and very specific detox nutrients and shakes. And what I tell people is my average person that does a 7-day detox loses 4 pounds of body fat. The most I've seen in a 10-day, believe it or not, is 21 pounds weight loss, with about 12 of that being fat and 9 of it being fluid, because you'll pull off fluid as well. That was a pretty big guy who was pretty toxic, so he desperately needed it. And if we go back to Ganoderma very, very quickly, it's actually proven to clear some of the worst toxins in the history of the planet while protecting the patients, like Parkinson's, toxins associated with Parkinson's, liver failure, pancreatic failure, or neural tube defects. And by the way, it's safe for pregnancies, so that's a very good thing as well. And it is, by the way, profoundly good for the liver. So interesting graphic that I pulled off the internet, are gut bugs making you fat? And in a lot of cases, absolutely it is, and that can be a problem. So this was still to date, I believe, the strangest experiment that anybody ever thought of, but a lot of lessons were learned there. So there were 2 identical human twins. One became obese, the other stayed lean. And someone got the idea, why don't we do a fecal transplant? So they took feces from the backside of the obese twin, put it in the backside of an identical twin mouse. They did the same feces from a lean twin, put it in the backside of a lean twin mouse. And this mouse, the exact diet, the exact same timing, composition, everything else, the mouse that got the obese microbiome became obese. And so there's ways to do that. By the way, I do this talk twice on Tuesdays, and someone reached out to me afterwards and said, look, how do you do a fecal transplant? Because they can actually, guess what, go in the reverse direction. Well, what I tell them is, that's one, beyond my scope of practice, but I had a patient who had struggled, losing weight, couldn't lose weight no matter what he did. And he asked me, can you help me with a fecal transplant? So I put him on a 3-way call with a pro at it, a Dr. Sidney Baker, who was actually doing fecal transplants with autistic patients in the 1990s and having great success. We actually have more brain chemistry in our gut than we have in our brain. But anyways, here's what he said. He said, find an all-organic baby with an all-organic mom, non-vaccinated, get a little bit of stool from the diaper, put in a little bit of saline and put it in your backside. Well, my elite patient that did that, that was the only change he made. And, I remember he lost 50 or 60 pounds in about 4 months. The math might not be exact, but it was a profound change. Maybe it was 60 pounds in 6 months, or, but whatever it was fast. And that was the only thing he changed. So that can be very, very, very powerful. And then again, my favorite, superfood, really good for the microbiome and even proven to reduce obesity. And 94% of rats prefer processed sugar to cocaine. So, it probably should be looked at very, very closely. There's a researcher named Candace Pert that made the statement. She said, if we tried to get sugar past the FDA today, it probably wouldn't happen because it is so addictive. When we start looking at dopamine and addiction, there are, I think I'll go to the next slide, something like, 8,300 plus studies on dopamine and addiction. And it doesn't matter the addiction. You could be addicted to your smartphone. You could be addicted to sugar or any of the drugs that we're talking about. But dopamine is the absolute critical factor in addiction. So, again, some people have said, Bob, and I'll tell a story. I was giving a lecture in Toronto years ago, and it was in a live audience, and there was someone, that was on the right-hand side of the room. And I said, okay, does anybody have any questions before we start? And this individual said, you know what, somehow this coffee, this reishi Ganoderma infused coffee reduces my alcohol cravings. How is this possible? Well, the answer is that dopamine component. So it's actually very, very good for brain chemistry and overall brain health, as well as fat burning by at least half a dozen different mechanisms. We certainly have to talk about moving right. Life is motion. We certainly want to move. Part of what I do whenever I prepare for a section like this is to try to see what's latest and greatest. And a number of obesity researchers have said, no, we shouldn't really even begin to talk about food till we start talking about motion. Because here's what we know: if people exercise enough, they have a lot more latitude in terms of their diet. And so, moving right is going to be absolutely critical. So David Goggins, I don't know if you know his story, but he is one of the toughest people on the planet. He was 285 pounds and unfit. When he decided, okay, enough's enough, he was going to become a Navy SEAL. You start looking at Goggins, and he decided he was going to run 100 miles one day. And he went out, and believe it or not, he did it, but he nearly killed himself in the process, nearly dehydrated, wasn't ready for it. The amazing thing about him was he wasn't going to quit. So literally started this race and he ran 100 miles in 24 hours. He actually, I don't know why it doesn't say he fractured his tibias, because he did that, lost 7 toenails, was urinating blood, kidney failure, etc. But they used to have a TV show called The Biggest Loser, and I'm going to call this person that season the biggest winner. These people would lose sometimes 80, 90, 100 pounds in 9 months. And how would they do it? They'd do it with really good coaches, very diligent diet, and very diligent exercise program. So there's certainly more than one way to get the job done. Goggins wrote the book called Can't Hurt Me. And you see the big picture of him in the background and how he ultimately evolved. But here's what I'll tell you: you don't have to do that. But there's something called the pleasure-pain principle. And I believe that Goggins had so much emotional pain at this point in his life that putting his body through that level of torture was probably a relief from what he was previously experiencing. And so ultimately, I love the idea that you create an identity as a healthy, lean person. And once you own that identity, you take actions to do that. Now, there's too many people that say, well, I don't feel like it. And there's other people that'll tell you, what do feelings have to do with it? If you are identifying with being your best self, your leanest self, your healthiest self, then take those actions. And one of the best that really spoke it into existence, Muhammad Ali, we know him. He always said, I am the greatest, I am the greatest. And he said, you know what? He said that even before he knew that he was. Finally, pain and fatigue are often what keep people from exercising. So again, I'll go with my favorite herb, Ganoderma lucidum, reduces the inflammatory process by over a dozen known mechanisms, increases what are known as mitochondrial electron transport complexes, and that simply means that it increases energy efficiency. Mitochondria are where 94.4% of human energy are made and where all of the fat burning occurs. And when we start talking about pain again, it's phenomenal for pain relief, even for conditions like rheumatoid arthritis and or fibromyalgia, and 43 published medical studies on its benefits for mitochondria. So that will transition us to questions and answers. So if anybody has a question or typed it in the chat, certainly happy to address that.
Happy Tuesday evening to all. I had a great menu for making popcorn for dessert, and I was actually told that popcorn is actually not good because it creates leaky gut. Is this correct? The little shell, I guess, gets stuck in your gut and creates a leaky gut, is what I've been told.
I've never heard that. And so we can go back to ancient wisdom. One man's food's another man's poison. That's true. And I say, by the way, today, most men's food is a poison for all humanity. I would say probably the biggest challenge with popcorn is most of the corn out there is genetically modified. And so, there's toxins actually spliced within that you can't wash off. So if you did an organic, non-genetically modified, that would certainly be a better choice. And I personally have always recommended popcorn to my patients, especially when they wanted to lose weight. It's a good snack. They make it air popped, and what I'll have them do, sprinkle a little water on it to make it sticky, and then a little bit of salt. The minerals are fine. It makes it good and flavorful. It's satisfying on a lot of different levels. Doesn't have many calories at all. So, could it create leaky gut for somebody? Oh, of course it could, and just about anything could if you get too much of it and it's not right for you. But is it a food to avoid? Well, if you're talking about genetically modified, probably. But if it's organic, non-GMO, I'd say enjoy it.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome. But some of the questions I was asked is, what's ideal body composition? And is there a good way to assess that? And I actually do something called bioimpedance analysis. And what I tell people is that lean tissue is 73% water, fat tissue is 14% water. And so when we can accurately assess hydration in a non-bloated patient, males should come out 60 to 65% water, whereas females 55 to 60. Why more fat on women? Well, the secondary sexual characteristics of females are related to body fat, breast tissue, etc. But body fat has an endocrine activity. It actually converts testosterone to estrogen. And if females get too lean, they actually have drops in their hormones and they can become infertile. By the way, if males become too lean, that's harder to do. They have to get less than 4% body fat. They can have a compromised immune system. Someone asked, well, why do we tend to gain fat with age? And you know what? Things slow down with age, but not at all at the same rate. So, if we took an elite sprinter, they're probably fastest at 25, and at 35, they're definitely a step slower, and 45, a couple steps slower. That's true of our metabolism too. And so ultimately, we want to eat and move in ways that honor where we are in life. There's a diet program which is becoming more popular, and it's called the OMAD diet, OMAD, which means 1 meal a day. Now, that takes a lot of discipline, but there's a very famous athlete named Herschel Walker. Herschel Walker's, one of his claims to fame when he played college football, he won a Heisman Trophy as a freshman and again as a sophomore, and then he turned pro. He played, I don't know how many seasons in the United States Football League before that league went out of business. Then he played in the NFL. But even having missed seasons, overall, he was the number 4 yardage gainer in American football. Very amazing guy. Now, by the way, he's running for, I don't know if it's, Senate or the House in Georgia. I certainly hope he wins because he's, pretty amazing character with a really good head on his shoulders. Someone else asked, as menopause sets in, why do people gain weight? Again, it's going to be a change in metabolism. The body is going to suddenly start using the adrenal glands to make the precursors of the sex steroids, which are going to be made by the tissue. And when females are under a lot of stress, then instead of making the precursor to their sex steroids, they actually make stress hormones. And when we've talked about endocrinology, we said, you're either making stress hormones or sex hormones, not both at the same time. So that can be a big drain on that. So little filler there. Did anybody else come up with any other questions?
Yes, we have 2. The one you can read in the chat in regards to patients you have.
The answer is, yeah, I am still seeing patients on still 449 Bay Area Boulevard, Houston, Texas, which is, used to be called Clear Lake, but now it's been annexed by Houston. So you bet, Dinah, still there. And I see you've got a Houston number, so hopefully I'll be seeing you soon.
And the other question, a relative has been diagnosed with bipolar. Any suggestions for them?
Yeah, I think we did brain health a few times, but there's a medical researcher named Daniel Amen, and now he's done over 200,000 brain scans. And he wrote a book called The End of Mental Illness. And he said, what if brain health and mental health are basically one and the same? Well, they're not one and the same, but they're very closely coupled. And how many people actually have a healthy brain? Not enough. You know, the brain, I tell people, is the most nutrient dependent, energy dependent, stress vulnerable, toxin vulnerable. And Dr. Amen has now written over 40 books. He's done over 200,000 brain scans. I would certainly, I think he's got a cutting edge clinic where they can identify areas of the brain that don't have enough activity, enough blood flow, and then proven strategies to enhance all of them. Now, I always start by creating a healthier brain. So the brain is mostly water. It's the most hydrated tissue in the body, 77% water. And then the highest structural component is fat. And the dominant fat is called DHA, docosahexaenoic acid. And we have a profoundly omega-3 deficient world. And there have been studies on brain health and omega-3, and it's absolutely indisputable. So good quality omega-3s, buffer the stress, do a good detox. And if you're anywhere near or able to travel to one of Dr. Amen's 10 clinics, that could be something to go to. And, you know, I think when you start looking at medicine, there's functional medicine and there's dysfunctional medicine. And sadly, most of psychiatry is dysfunctional medicine, but Dr. Amen breaks the rule there. He actually is a very good functional nutrition, health-minded psychiatrist, but he'll tell you there are cases where medication can be helpful, especially in the short term, and in extreme cases, even the long term.
Perfect. Well, that is the last question in the chat, so it looks like you may be able to get to that party.
I will enjoy the party. You know, I'm not even sure the topic next week. We'll figure it out, but hopefully it'll be good. And so good night all, and God bless.